what have been some of the really good experiences you've had with aid, being in the sector? Some of the really memorable experiences that have, left you, realizing that, there has been some impact of aid in the sector.
Of course, these are conversations of perspective. However, when you think about what Wairo has talked about, the international aid and then enters China. So the year is 2008, and I'm having a conversation with the Minister of State from England. He'd come and he just wanted to get a perspective of how things are. And I remember, obviously, the persons who had invited me, they must have thought I'm crazy, because I'm like, how do you talk to a minister like this? And I remember telling him, let's be honest. So I remember giving him data about, on trade, how much Kenya is exporting to England, and the reverse. And the conclusion of that was, brother, don't compete with China, matters trade. There's some things when you think of the West, especially stuff to do with, accountability, transparency, they've lived this for a long time. There's some things in that regard that work, So when you think about, and, Ezra has said it and has better history, the whole space of bringing about the constitutional change and, the civil liberties, there was a lot of money that actually came from the West, It was there, and obviously then the President Moi wasn't happy with these things. Many had to sacrifice their lives. And then you had, an ambassador, the American ambassador, Hemstone. He was because he was so dramatic. He would be on the streets with us. How do you like that? So when you think about some of the support programs that are very targeted for whether it is strengthening or improving democratic governance, you have Kenya is a success story, but as I said, obviously you have perspectives of, how did it go and all that. So because we cannot, exhaust the question of methodology, but I think for me, that space of overhauling or just trying to sort out, civil liberties, the constitutional dispensation. I think that for me, I would cite it as a good example of where international aid, came through, if that is the word that I would use. Yeah.
I remember from a very young age, my parents, for instance, shifted from a rural setting to Nairobi in the year before independence, 1964. And 1963. So we watched independence happen here as a little kid. And the one thing I never forget was a couple of years after that, the introduction of the cooperative movement into the country, into our communities. And my parents being members of what was called the Jamhuri Credit Consumers Cooperative. And I know for a fact, because I found out later, that my dad was not earning very much. He'd moved into Nairobi with 6 kids, with a wife and 6 kids, and a fairly small house. But we basically survived on what salary he had and the cooperative, largesse, because they were members of this cooperative. I see the cooperative movement as a major success story in the same way as GK has cited, because I think that there is a lot that the cooperative movement brought into this country, and a lot of that was underwritten by foreign aid, by aid, from different countries. Largely the Scandinavian countries, I think, were, the main propagators of the cooperative movement. And I see that as one of the major successes that they can claim, even though corruption and all that came engaged after that. But I think I see that as a really, really instructive story, how the cooperative movement changed this country's political economy dramatically. Yeah.
So I think for me, the best experience is of international aid that I have seen is in monies that were put into developing local civil society organizations to be financially stable, to be financially sustainable. And this is from an organization that I worked for that actually, for a long time, there's been this conversation about, not-for-profits, what happens when the donor money leaves, right? And for the first time I experienced an organization that actually thought about it and did something about it. And a lot of the support came from aid, but mostly from the philanthropy organizations. And I've just seen the important role that philanthropy has played in this country, and is playing in the civil society sector, and is playing in just changing the narratives. I was actually reading something about Mackenzie Scott, the former, the ex of Jeff Bezos, and how she's just giving out millions of dollars to organizations and just shifting the whole ecosystem, really. And this organization I worked with brought together, always started from the premise that communities have something to give, that they're not completely poor, right? That they have something. And I remember the first experience was that, we would give matching grants. So we would say, okay, we would go to the community and we would tell them, okay, what do you want to do? And they would say, okay, we want to build a hospital, we want to build a school, we want to build a boarding. So we went to a community which is about 200 kilometers from Nairobi, and they said, you know what, we want more classrooms, and we want a boarding kind of facility for the girls, because we feel that they're not able to get the education that they need. And then, okay, we were like, okay, that's fine. What can you contribute towards that? And the whole community brought goats, and they brought like lots and lots of goats, and they were put in this pen. And they said, this is what we're contributing. And the value of those goats was actually 60% of how much they needed to build those facilities. And, it completely blew me away, because it reinforced the fact that communities have something to give, and that many times we're just saying they're so poor and they need us, but they have something that they can contribute. And that was such a powerful thing for me. And this then grew out into building out matching grants and building out endowment funds to support community initiatives like that. So where they would bring money, we would bring money together and would invest it, and then the interest that came out of it would then go back to supporting models like that have just shaped how I've thought about development, moving forward, and realizing that there's a place where we can start from. I mean, I want to also talk about the role that international aid has played in just the women's rights movement in Kenya and in Africa, because a lot of money has gone into, and even when you look at the education programs, you will find that many of them have gone into educating girls. And what we call the girl child, and many young women and many women in the sector have actually come to the space and have been able to be economically independent, etc., because of international aid.